so much time in combat and spend so much time overseas to come back and see all these people that really don't know the darkest side of the world currently. I mean, people have a view of what the earth is in 2017, and if you live in San Francisco and all you do is, you know, you work at Silicon Valley and you hang out in the tech industry, you think that this is the world in 2017 because this is your world. Yeah. This is your insulated little, like we were talking about, you don't really know the world until you go into the forest. You go into the forest, you go, oh, this is the world too. The backcountry is still the world. It's just, oh, this is what it's really like when we don't have these artificial structures. And when you spent so much time in combat and you come over and you see all these people that are fighting over these insignificant things and squabbling about the use of the preferred gender pronouns and all this crazy shit that people find significant today.
It is very challenging for me to listen to the things that people feel are important and the lack of, I would say it's the lack of what I would consider to be perspective. And it's funny, if you do, say I did 17 years in the military, let's say a guy does 20 years, you actually don't spend that much time in combat. Let's say you do a 6-month deployment, you're working even at every night of that 6-month deployment, which isn't going to be the case, so every other night. So now you're working 90 days. Of that time, you might spend 30 minutes in combat in those 90 days. Multiply that by 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 deployments. In 20 years, that's your total time combined in an actual combat environment, not a theater of war, but a combat environment where you're directly involved in it. But that time period, for me, changes the way that I view the world. Not only that time period, but just the time spent in those countries and seeing what's the standard in other countries and what's the standard here. And when I hear, and again, I think we talked about it before, people talk about inequality or oppression here in this country. And I'll be the first to admit that there's inequality, which is fine because there's inequality everywhere. But let's take a little bit of perspective here. If you are fortunate enough to wake up in the United States of America, the water that you sit down on the toilet over to take a shit is cleaner than most of the water people on Earth are going to have access to. You go to Starbucks and you may pay more per ounce for a cup of coffee for the fluid than you do the gas coming out of your pump going into your car that exceeds the annual income of most people on the face of the planet. You living in a first world country where instead of spending your time trying to find that water, you get to spend your time sleeping in line in front of the Apple store waiting for the new iPhone to come out. And then you have the balls to bitch about how bad you have it. That to me is a super tough pill to swallow. Because you want to talk about oppression and suppression of freedom of speech. I've seen street corners that are still red from lopping dudes' heads off because they voiced opinion that was counter to the opinion of the day. That will change your perspective on whether or not words hurt you and, what rights actually mean. And you'll be like, you know what you say is actually really offended. It's offensive to me, but I'm glad we live in a place where you can say those things. Moving on with my day.
How much does that change your perspective on human beings when you're in those environments? Like what you think a human being actually is.
I have an inherent distrust of most human beings. If I'm being totally honest, I don't want to say that I'm antisocial. My wife would say that she probably wishes that I was more social, but I just kind of just take a step back and just try to avoid interactions with just about everybody that I encounter.
Well, I would imagine that your spectrum is so much wider than the average person's spectrum in terms of the atrocities that people are capable of committing. You've seen, most of the time, right, you're operating in this one small little sort of village in the spectrum that most people are that are in civilization. You're in this one little tiny area, but you've seen the full thing. You've seen horrible, horrible shit.
Yep.
That's gotta, there's no way that wouldn't have some sort of an effect on how you would approach people.
Well, like I said, it puts me in a position where I almost have to sit back and I have to bite my tongue because I don't share the opinions that most people share. Because if the military service that I have gave me anything, I think it gave me a different perspective on the world. And it's only because I traveled to more of it than I think most people get the chance to do. And I got to see more of it, not through my phone and my Instagram screen, but through my own eyes. And that, all it really did is just changed my value perspective of life, of the little things. It makes it hard sometimes.
Was there like a single or any significant moments that you can recall that really shifted the way you think about things?
In what perspective
Just
do you mean?
knowing that people are capable of horrible shit.
I think the times that got me the most on that is where you would see adults talking kids into becoming suicide bombers.